And we are now live and recording. Hello, everybody. Hello, world. Welcome to our first eco lifestyle discussion series discussion on water with Brook. And just testing just the technology right now, like thumbs up, thumbs down if everybody can hear me. It looks like I'm getting thumbs up from most people. Mark, we got a thumbs up? Cool. And there's a chat window down at the bottom if anybody is not familiar with Zoom. And you can type in questions. And just a few minutes ago, I asked if everybody wants to type where you're located, just so we kind of know where everybody is. And you can interact with us. And we will have follow-up information that we'll be like sharing in the chat window with links during the discussion. So it's good for everybody to know. So somebody's in PB, okay. So I'll test in there right now as a link to the follow-up for people who can't be live on this this discussion. They can click that link and we'll share it later, that people can share questions about this discussion, and they can also watch the recording of this. So all right, enough of the technology. Welcome, everybody. So my name is Joshua Alvord, and I am the director and founder of a nonprofit organization called Local Earth, with a focus on environmental stewardship and eco-village development. And we're actually in the midst of the first phases of an eco-village project about 45 minutes north of San Diego, near Valley Center. And it's really exciting. There's 7 of us on the land right now. There'll be up to 12 of us soon. It's 11 acres of land, and just all doing the best we can in terms of all of our basic activities, whether it's related to water, food, energy, shelter, just learning how we can live in the most ecologically responsible and mindful way possible. So that's a little bit about the organization. That's kind of the background of this program that we've created called the Ecological Lifestyle Immersion. And the idea is that not everybody can move and live in an eco-village right away. That's a pretty big step. And so what we've done is created a program for people that are interested in living in a more eco-friendly way and would like some encouragement, inspiration, and guidance in just different areas of their life of how they can make more ecologically mindful choices. So the program is, we have a welcome module that includes several action steps. And then once people complete the welcome module, they start what we call the Eco Lifestyle Challenge. And it's a 12-month challenge. We have a different theme for each month, starting with water, then food, energy, shelter, waste, and so on. And so we give people baby steps, medium steps, or like giant steps of action that people can take in their lives to live in a more ecologically balanced way. So that's a little bit about the ecological lifestyle immersion, the challenge that this discussion series is part of. And each month we will be doing one of these discussions with a visionary expert in a specific field related to that theme. So this month is water, and this is why we are talking with the guru of water in San Diego, Brook Sarson. So, yeah, water, like it's kind of the most basic, one of our most basic building blocks of life. It's one of our most precious natural, I say elements because I don't like the word resources at times, because I think it just puts it into our head that like it's resources that are here for humans to use. So just a precious natural element. And I think a lot of us are familiar with the term water is life recently over the last couple years. Mini-Wachoni, the situation at Standing Rock has brought a lot of awareness to the preciousness of water and the delicateness of our systems. And right now, I'm just gonna encourage everybody to use the little chat window over on the side and share with us what your biggest concern is about water issues where you live. And so as Brooke and I are talking in this discussion, we can browse over there in the discussion window and see what people are saying. So please share what you think your biggest concerns are about water where you live. And Brooke and I have known each other for quite a while. We were looking back how we first met, and it was actually in 2013. There was an event called the March for Healthy Food, and one of her friends connected us back in the day. And then she and I, a couple of years ago, worked together on an event called the Sustainable Living Symposium at the Energy Innovation Center. And Brooke came and gave a wonderful presentation on water systems. And yeah, so that's a little history of Brooke and I go quite a ways back. And it's a real honor to be here speaking with you. Brooke has been on a mission to be a resource to the San Diego community for water harvesting. And she has started 2 companies called Catching H2O and H2Ome to show homeowners, educators, and policymakers how simple and effective rainwater harvesting and greywater recycling can be. So welcome, Brooke. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing your time and wisdom and knowledge. And could you please give us a little background of your experience, the companies that you started, and kind of what brought you to this point in life?
Sure. Thanks, Josh. Thanks for everything, for having me, and hi to everybody. I have a degree in electrical engineering, so I did that for a while, and at some point I was trying to think about what I really wanted to be doing with my time and energy. And I've always been deeply connected to water. And I've realized over the years, I grew up kind of in Bishop, which is in the Owens Valley on the eastern side of the Sierras. And water was always a really big issue there. By that stage, LADWP had basically reformatted the whole water system there by draining it down to LA. And even though I didn't understand a lot of that at the time, I think it left a big place in me that was really connected with water. So, I started to explore water in the West more. I grew up in LA after Bishop in the drought periods, and then there was a big drought in San Diego. And I had kind of traveled around Australia and Arizona. I'd done a permaculture course in Arizona. And what I noticed was that the water ethic was completely different in these places. And rainwater harvesting and greywater use was more commonplace. It was more encouraged by municipalities. And I just felt inspired to kind of create more energy in that arena here in San Diego. I thought it was an appropriate technology for this place, and I didn't understand why nobody was having those conversations here. There was a lot of talk at that time about desalination and indirect potable reuse, and just diversifying the water portfolio, but they were putting very little emphasis on conservation. And kind of looking at how much water we're all using, it seemed ridiculous to me. In San Diego at that time, we were using 160 gallons per person per day. And you think about, people in Africa, like say Cape Town, where they're going to get their water bottles for drinking and hand washing, the basic essentials of life. And they have to walk to go get water. And that's in the middle of a city, let alone out in the countryside. So we're taking so much for granted. So I started reading about I read Cadillac Desert, which is a great, eye opener for the history of water in the West, and helps us understand why water is so cheap at this point in time, because of the infrastructure that went in during a different period. And so I didn't really start out to start a business. I kind of just started out to kind of talk to people, and I installed these systems in my home, and I welcomed people in groups and talked to them about everything. And before I knew it, I was installing rainwater tanks and greywater systems, and I had started a business. So 10 years later, fast forward, and have installed hundreds of greywater systems and hundreds of thousands of gallons of rainwater storage throughout San Diego, and probably answered most of the same questions you guys have here tonight, thousands of times. So would love to just help answer any of your questions tonight too.
Well, so that leads, you shared a few questions that you do hear a lot of, it doesn't rain much in San Diego. Why do people put in rainwater tanks? Is one that you've shared people say. Another question is greywater illegal, and can I use it to water my lawn? And another one was, can I drink rainwater? So what are your responses to a few of those questions?
So I think the essence of this is really getting to the basics of what are you trying to do and what are your resources. So we generally start with something called a water budget, which is figuring out how much water is actually coming off of your roof, or how much water you're actually producing out of your greywater fixtures, like your showers and your laundry. Primarily, kitchen sink water is technically considered black water by the state, and it takes a certain extra effort to be able to manage it well in your landscape. Other states, I have to say, I don't know all the codes in all the states. I know Arizona has very lenient greywater codes, but there's a lot to consider. Here we're in dry lands, and so sending 20 gallons a day out into our yard isn't going to have a huge impact on our local waterways. But if we're living in a place where it's like raining and flooding, and you send 20 gallons of bacteria laden greywater out to your landscape, it could go into storm drains and local waterways and create contamination. So really understand how much water is going out, and then how much water your soil can manage. And what you're trying to do, again, are you trying to grow plants, or are you living in a place where you can't grow plants? Because then capturing rainwater might be a good thing to do for flushing toilets or drinking. So you can drink rainwater. You should really filter it, but you don't need to filter it a lot. If you filter it before it goes into the tank, then you can decrease a lot of contamination, and then maybe you could just either boil it or put it through a charcoal filter, or even zap it with UV to be extra safe. And then greywater, mostly the most economical way to use greywater would be to use it in your landscape to accentuate your landscape, hopefully grow food. But you don't want to surface flow it over a lawn, because it's full of bacteria. And ideally you have a lawn because you want kids and pets to roll around on it, and you don't want them coming into contact. Otherwise, I have to ask, why do you have a lawn in Southern California, where a 500 square foot lawn uses like 10,000 gallons of water a year, which you might not even be able to produce from either rainwater or from your greywater sources. So going to the effort of watering a lawn subsurface would be a lot of expense for that. I'd rather see it go to fruit trees or other shrubs and vines, and just no filters, no issues with contamination.
And some of this links into when we've been preparing for this discussion a little bit, and wanting to kind of go to the macro scale of like how people perceive their use of water in different environments and different ecosystems, because it's going to be different for somebody in Portland than it's going to be for somebody in San Diego or anywhere in the United States. And so we wanted this discussion to be relevant to anybody anywhere in the country or the world, actually, that ends up listening or watching. And so Brooke started talking about just concepts of ecological design and integrated strategies. So would you like to expand on kind of what those principles of ecologic design are, and how you approach that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to start not with solving the problem with the certain, tool or element that you want to solve, but rather to look at the whole question of what you're trying to design towards. And making observations is how you start the ecological design process. So especially when you're dealing with water, you want to understand, and if you're putting it into your soil, you want to understand your soil type, because how it holds water is going to be an important part of how you can safely use gray water in your landscape. You want to understand, hopefully you're working with water in conjunction with plants, and then understanding how much water your plants need is a really important part of that. I practice permaculture design, which is a set of ethics that guide you, and then a set of principles that you can follow that help you understand how to make good decisions during the design process. Doing something like putting in a rainwater tank is just a tool in your tool belt. It doesn't mean that that's an overarching solution for everybody in every situation. Putting chickens in your backyard or composting, those kinds of things are cool, but they're not necessarily the solution to everybody's problems. There are solutions for specific problems that you're trying to solve. So really understanding the context of your design and where you're located and what your rainfall is, what your sun angles are, what your soil type is. All of those things are really important, and as far as knowing whether or not these are appropriate techniques for you. And I have to say, the way that you would use rainwater in Portland could be a lot different than the way you use it in San Diego. In San Diego, we get rain one time a year. We want to catch as much as we can so that we can water things during the dry season. In Portland, it rains so much you can't probably store all the rain that you could get because you just don't have enough space. So really cycling through that water regularly is a good way to find balance, where you can get a certain size that might take care of all of your laundry washing that then goes out to gray water. In the winter, you can do laundry washing, drinking, toilet flushing, those kinds of things. And then in the summer, save enough to kind of help things limp along. In some climates like that, you don't need a lot of extra water in the summer. Places like Tucson, where you get like a winter rain and then you get a summer monsoon rain, you would plan your system differently than you would when you only have rain for like 3 months of the year. So those are, there's just different techniques, and it's really like taking your site in context with all your natural resources.
And so it sounds like there's a lot based on like the scale of design for a system. And when you shared, like, one of the first principles of like a permaculture is observation. So I guess that's where it starts. And then I guess you really love integrated strategies. And so like realizing that the water strategy, might play in with your garden and your food planting strategy and so these different components of a permaculture approach to a project. It's just really interesting to take in all of these elements and see how they all come together like a little puzzle.
Yeah, I always say integration is key. It's kind of like, we do like a web of connection kind of exercise, which is really fun. And But you can think of it as like a forest, or you can think about a lot of things in nature. And the more integrated things are, the more things that if something goes wrong, you can fall back on something else, the more likely that system is to succeed. So like, for example, you know, we use the forest garden as a good idea, as a good example. And this is a great book for anybody that wants to learn more about forest gardening or permaculture techniques. It's Toby Hemingway's Guy's Garden. You know, people plant oftentimes, like especially on farms, you see monoculture. You'll just see a rows and rows of trees or something. But in a forest, those trees have plants that basically pull nitrogen out of the air and bring it down into the soil to help the trees. And you have roots that break up the soil, like root plants that break up the soil. You have like mulching or ground covering plants that kind of protect the soil from evaporation. You have all these layers in a forest that help make it so you don't have to water this tree so much all the time. And then you go up into the hills of Fallbrook, and an avocado tree that might take 50 gallons a week in a healthy forest scenario uses 300 gallons a week because the water quality is terrible from the brackish wells, and they're growing in a void where they don't have supporting plants. So recreating those systems in your garden will help you use less water, and then making sure that you have elements that back each other up. So you have gray water on a regular basis, but you know, the salts from the gray water might build up in the soil. And because especially in San Diego, we have a very clay soil, so the larger salt particles can't get through the smaller clay particles very easily. And so what happens is our city water has all these salts, and then we send salts out with our soaps in our gray water, and they start to build up in the top layer of soil and inhibit plants from the roots of plants from being able to intake moisture and nutrients. Whereas if you then take the same areas that you flood with gray water, you send your rainwater overflow or your rainwater downspouts into those areas. Once a year, you get this flush of super clean, soft water that just pushes all the salts down through the soil. So integration is really an important part of these systems. It's not one thing is going to solve all your problems.
And that really like strikes a chord, like here at home when you talked about the avocado trees, like in Fallbrook or something, right around where we're at, and realizing the property here used to actually be an avocado orchard, and that, like you said, in a forest-like condition in nature, it might require 50 gallons, but in a monocrop culture, it might be requiring massive amounts more. And like that's just, I get down into like what scales we're trying to meet our needs, and whether it's like a village trying to grow enough avocados for 10 or 12 people, and they're doing that in a food forest that's on their property, versus big 50-acre farm that's trying to provide avocados for 10,000 people at once or something. And so I think there's a lot of value in looking at our scales of design and how we approach meeting these solutions as individuals and as communities, whether it's as an individual or whether it's starting small eco-villages or intentional communities all around the country where people are starting to take those actions, like rather as an individual, but as a small group of people, I think is a great thing.
Yeah. And I would even say that, aside from being an intentional community, we are all parts of a community. And the best thing we can do is take this kind of knowledge and work within our neighborhoods, within our cities, and really talk to our friends and our neighbors, because the reality is that the people all around us, they don't really understand these things. So they're just kind of going business as usual. And things can only shift if we start to shift at the bigger scale, like if we all start to shift.
Yeah.
And so up until now, I've been doing kind of grassroots, which is like workshops and talking and consultations and single installations and stuff. But the energy really starts to move when you have whole neighborhoods that start to implement these same practices, rather than, houses in Del Mar or, Carlsbad, where they just want what they want. They want this certain kind of landscape, and you really can't fit the wise water strategies in because they're not willing to work with those strange concepts. They just want what they want.
Mm-hmm.
So, sometimes um, I just have to kind of know that if the more that we all talk to each other and the more that we all share these ideas in the right way, more people will adopt them. And it's really important if we want to achieve water sovereignty, which right now, San Diego, for example, relies on imported water for 80% of its water supply. 80% of our water comes from hundreds of miles away. It takes about 25% of our state's energy budget to move water throughout the state and process wastewater. So that is obviously unsustainable. And we're not at like Cape Town, like day zero yet. But unless we change our ways, there's no way we can keep just using water in the way that we are. So we really have to kind of spread this network out into our wider communities and into the greater cities and areas around us.
So share this conversation with your friends, please, everybody. I think that's the beauty of, like, I think a lot of us really enjoy getting together in person and having events, but then there is the beauty of technology where we can reach a lot of people with these important messages, and going between the macro and the micro and back to the macro, what we can do as individuals, what we can do as communities. And I love what you mentioned about the watershed and talking to your neighbors and the people in your city or your town, your neighborhood. And recently was at an event at the World Beach Center. They were bringing awareness to the run for salmon, which is a situation going on up in Northern California, where a dam has been built that stopped the flow of like the salmon being able to go upstream, and the indigenous land and tribes that were up there, it's really drastically affected their livelihoods and their way of being. And somebody at that event was saying, this woman was from Hawaii, and she said, in Hawaii, when they ask, it was almost like part of their language of like, rather than like, what is your name, of saying I'm Joshua or you're Brooke, it's kind of like, what are you? What watershed are you from? What are you made of? And like, it took the kind of the I and the me out of like, I am Josh, I am Brooke. Like, we are the San Diego watershed, and we're connected by that, and I thought that was a really beautiful perspective on shifting how we look at water and what connects us.
Absolutely. It is kind of strange that we have these pretty arbitrary borders, like a border between Mexico and San Diego. We share the same watershed, the Tijuana River watershed, and it gets hugely polluted in Tijuana, and it makes its way back to San Diego. And we have farmers that rely on that water on both sides. And then we have it outletting into the ocean on the U.S. side. So we are largely responsible for dealing with contamination issues and all those kinds of things here. And there's more efforts being made for people to work across borders, but it is interesting. Even here in San Diego, you have different cities that are, sitting on either side of a watershed, or sharing a single city that shares two watersheds, but they have their own water management process that's pretty independent from watersheds because the water's being imported anyway. So it's definitely an interesting conversation and awareness. And I think educating ourselves about what watershed we come from, where that water starts and where it ends is really good. One little thing I love is that the Santa Margarita River is, I think it's the last water way in California that hasn't been altered in its course. So, and that's here, and it's in Fallbrook. And actually, there were beavers on the river, in the last couple years, which is really cool because beavers are a great sign of watershed health.
Wow.
Um, so there's a lot of really cool facts once you get to know the watersheds in San Diego.
And that's so I'd like to throw several questions out to the people who are live with us on this chat and this discussion right now. In the chat window, if you could share, like, if you know the annual rainfall of of your community, and then also do you know what a watershed is? I think Brooke can give us a little overview of a basic explanation of that. And do you know the name of your watershed? And do you know where your water comes from? So if any of you want to take a moment to go over to the chat window and answer those questions, we can take a little look at that. And while we're doing that, maybe Brooke, you can just give us a basic overview of what a watershed is.
Yeah, a watershed is basically, sorry, I gave a really gnarly link there, but I'll give a different one for this movie called Damnation, which is a great documentary about just what kind of havoc dams wreak on a watershed and an ecology, and then what some people are doing to remove dams now. We just had like a crazy dam building phase in like the 30s and to the 50s, and we're only just realizing how terrible that was. But basically a watershed is an area that the boundaries of the watershed delineate the water all moving in a pathway to a single outlet. So you'd imagine like a ring of mountains, and on the peak of the mountains, the water falls one way on one side of the mountain and on the other way on the other side of the mountain, and they might drain to two different areas. So you have larger watersheds, and then you have micro watersheds. I think the San Diego River watershed has some smaller watersheds, like the Pueblo watershed and the Chollas Creek watershed. And the larger San Diego watershed starts all the way up in the mountains and just has this huge area. But then there's these smaller watersheds within it that they've been able to find some gnarly pollution that drains into the harbors. And by isolating what watersheds that pollution is coming from, they're able to go back into those communities and do things like street sweeping, outreach, like really dealing with what's causing that pollution and isolating it from where the water's draining out of. Does that make sense?
It does, and it links in. I was looking through some of the questions in the chat window, and Samuel had said one of his main concerns was contamination of watershed by agriculture. And so I guess when we start to get into those micro watersheds and understand them, we can track down what is flowing into them.
Yep, and specifically deal with the farmers and the farming practices in that specific watershed. I mean, there are issues with like the fertilizers and stuff add high levels of nitrogen and other things into the waterways that the fish populations and all the organisms in the water, they just can't tolerate those high levels, and you get native species die off and algal blooms and all of this kind of stuff.
Well, so we've talked about kind of the larger scale concepts of ecological design, and then for some of us just like that are here in San Diego, do you have kind of an example of a solution here in Southern California for like what an average home, maybe 1,200 square feet, that wants to plant 5 fruit trees and 2 veggie boxes, like what that solution could look like for that type of family or home?
Sure. I think that's a great example. I see that kind of stuff all the time. And my questions start to be, well, how much laundry are you doing every week? And do you have a front or a top load washer? And is it old or is it new? And then we start to figure out, well, if I'm do 4 loads a week in my high efficiency front load washer, that's about 40 gallons of water from your Greywater. And I like to start with the laundry machine because in California, you don't need a permit to use laundry Greywater. B, it's actually the most accessible, one of the most accessible fixtures in your house, especially if you're on a slab foundation. It's generally like in a garage or in a room adjacent to the garage or on an outside wall. And the laundry machine has a pump on it. So instead of, it kind of, the water drains to the bottom and then the pump pumps the water up into a standpipe so then it can drain with gravity into the sewer. But if instead of draining it into that standpipe, you keep it in a smaller diameter pipe, a 1-inch pipe, you can just pop a 1-inch hole out of the side of your house and distribute that water out into your landscape with some amount of pressure. So you don't have to put it into an irrigation system, and you don't have to store it, and you don't have to get to the drain. So that's usually the place I start with people. It can be pretty inexpensive in San Diego City. They're giving $250 rebates, which is pretty cool. But going back to our example, 4 loads a week, high efficiency front load washer. You can water, maybe you get 40 gallons out of that, maybe 2 small trees in your yard. So, or a planted area that's pretty good, maybe with a vine and some shrubs. So that would be, we'd figure out like where could that water go. And then if you have a raised foundation and you have a crawl space, I'd start to think about your shower setup. And so maybe you're 2 people and you each take 10-minute showers, and your shower head's 2 gallons per minute. So you're producing about 40 gallons a week, or 40 gallons a day of Greywater. So that's 280 gallons a week, which is enough for probably almost 12 fruit trees. So in some cases, in the small kind of lot, you might be thinking about, this might be too much water for your space, especially with our high clay content soils. So we'll think about that and we'll see how it might fit in. I might suggest use a 1.5 gallon per minute shower head, reduce your the amount of water you're outputting to be a better match for your landscape and save water too. Awesome. And then your 1,200 square foot roof, the rule of thumb is that 1,000 square foot roof will generate about 600 gallons from a single inch of rain. And there's calculators and calculations you can do online. It's basically 7.48 gallons per cubic foot. So you can apply that to 1,200 square feet, and it's probably about like 650, 700 gallons of water. It's probably coming off of a roof line that, has 2 locations where there's going to be downspouts or more. So either you want to catch all that water and put it in one big tank, which is going to be usually the most cost effective because a single large tank is going to be cheaper than several small tanks that add up to that amount. But in our little small homes, you might go to, like maybe 1,000 gallons, maybe 500 gallons, maybe 1,500 gallons, and use it to hand water a couple veggie patches you have or something. That's kind of like an average scenario. If you wanted to save more rainwater than that, obviously I would encourage you to do that. But it starts to take up a lot of space. Like a 1,000 gallon tank will take up about 6 feet of space. And so you got to do these balancing acts of how much land am I willing to give up for my water storage when I might want a veggie patch there. And just to understand, rainwater is a good match for your veggies and your natives, your drought tolerant plants, and everything else. But Greywater is really only a good match for trees, vines, and shrubs, not ground covers and lawns, and not food-producing vegetables that are close to the ground, like lettuces or root vegetables. So really keeping those areas pretty separate, or really understanding your soil and keeping healthy soil conditions is key to making those resources stretch.
Awesome. Thanks for that's a great bit of like detailed information for like San Diego, Southern California people. And so anybody who's on this chat now or watches this later, there's a lot of great information for you.
I have a couple of questions here that could I answer some of these questions?
Yeah, that's I was actually just gonna say. It looks like we have questions coming in, and I was just kind of open that up to right now in this discussion. Anybody who has questions, pop them in the chat window, and we will try to get to as many as we can before we log off.
Okay, so as far as plumbing gray water to flushing a toilet, Samuel, I would ask you why you would prioritize that. I understand that we don't like flushing toilets because it's wasting water. Gray water is a dirty water, and to filter it to the quality that you could flush a toilet with would be pretty expensive. And the easiest way to use gray water is to dump that bacteria-laden water into your soil, where the microorganisms can actually process that bacteria and turn it into food for your plants. So as far as legality goes, sure, you can do it, but you're going to have to jump through a lot of hoops to make that a permitted system. I would say flushing your toilet is one of the few things you could do with your on-site water. Use rainwater to do that. Or get a composting toilet. Or one of my new favorite books is Laura Allen's new Greywater Green Landscape book. She also has another book, which I really loved and was excited about when it came out, which is Waterwise Home, Laura Allen. But one thing that they show in this book is they have little toppers that go on your toilet tank where you can actually wash your hands directly over the toilet tank, and that water goes in to the tank to flush your toilet. But I would say you're going to deal with maintenance, and she says it very clearly in here, the bacteria, and if you use soap, all of that stuff sitting in the tank that never really drains all the way is just going to build up, and you got to clean it out regularly. So just in my experience, the least amount of maintenance that you have to do, cleaning filters and maintaining things, the more likely yours to succeed when using these things. And then I also saw guidelines for detergent, which is a great question. So one thing you guys heard me talk about was salts, salt buildup in our soils. So there's a lot of things in detergents that are not bad for your soil. You've got nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus. Those are fertilizing agents. You get free fertilizer with your soap. That's awesome. But one thing that happens with soaps is they put a lot of salt in there. They put salt so that it suds up, so you feel like everything's getting cleaner, like when you shampoo or you wash your hands. They put salt in as a preservative. They put salt in as a softener. So like fabric softener is going to have a ton of salts in there. Don't use fabric softener in your washing machine if you're going to use gray water. So finding soaps that err on the side of very low to no sodium, like Dr. Bronner's peppermint soap, I think doesn't have any sodium at all. We use Oasis a lot, which was developed by Art Ludwig, who wrote this book, and also developed the laundry to landscape Greywater system, and also worked very hard to change the California code to adopt a permit-free laundry to landscape system. And he created the Oasis soap back in like his master's thesis at Berkeley or something to be biocompatible. And so it's actually not bad for your landscape. It's actually nutrient rich for your plants without having those salts that are going to be detrimental. So really, you have to read case by case on the labels, and I have a blog on my website, which my website is here. And if you go into the like Greywater section, you can find a blog on soaps. It's not that up to date, and unfortunately, they keep changing formulations of things. But some other brands that we recommend are like Ecos, which is more readily available at like Sprouts or Costco. But you want to watch out for things like Trader Joe's and Costco have their brands that are biodegradable or green or whatever. And these products might be biodegradable, but they're not intended, they don't really understand how to use them on your plants. So their labels don't necessarily apply to your landscape. So that's the very long version of that. Oh, and here's how to prevent odor from the gray water from the sink. I just did a really nasty clearing out of a gray water system where we put in a kitchen sink gray water to a front yard that really doesn't have enough space to process it, and the line got clogged and it's so gross. So really being careful with kitchen sink water is important. There's like food scraps, grease, and soap, and they all just combine to make a really nasty blend in the pipes and in the soil. The best way to prevent odor from any gray water is to have a healthy soil system. So you want to make sure there's enough space, enough soil to process the amount of water you're going to be outputting daily. And then you want to make sure you have a good amount of mulch in there to really absorb the water and harbor the microorganisms that can break down all of the bacteria in there. And if you have too small a space, that will likely lead to anaerobic conditions where you have pooling water that just stagnates and sits there and grows bacteria. So that would be the best way to prevent odor in any gray water system.
To chime in there, Brooke, so on that kind of explanation of how to deal with potential odors in the system of where the water is being dispersed out in the landscape, what about like we've heard of different types of filtration systems, like right at the source of like the sink, of going through like sand and charcoal as kind of your filter before the water runs out into the landscape. What if, I mean, could the odor and some of that start to actually happen right there in the filter itself, and is that a good idea or not?
Well, I remember when Laura Allen really first started talking about gray water, she started Greywater Gorillas. She was working a lot with kind of bark filters and things like that, mulch filters, sand filters, carbon filters. And what's really cool is that in her new book that I showed you, that Greywater Green Landscape or whatever, she specifically talks about how she's moved away from all of that because it really becomes a maintenance issue. There's really no need to go through that filtration step if you have enough land to process the amount of water that you're dealing with. And Art Ludwig's book, again, I know somebody put up a link, thank you for doing that, has a great page, and this just helps me all the time, where it talks about disposal loading rates. And so what you do is you do a percolation test and you figure out how quickly your soil drains. And then you can basically apply your water budget, your daily loading rate, to that soil percolation rate and figure out how much square footage you need to be able to dump that water in and have it soak in daily. So that's a really important process of good design. And if you do that, you should not need a filter.
Filter, okay.
And, yeah.
Great to know.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions that you've seen over here in the chat window, or anybody else that's on the call right now that you would like us to answer? Have you seen any other questions you'd like to get to, Brooke?
Phosphates. Right, exactly. Okay, so that's a great question. Phosphates in laundry detergents that help plant grow. Phosphates are not bad, but what happens is we put a lot of them in our soaps that then go out into, once we process our water, they go out into watersheds, and the amount of phosphates causes an imbalance in water health, in water. But in soil that stays in your, and if you keep that water on your land by making sure you have the contours that you're not running water into the storm drains, that those elements are actually nutrients for your soil. So there is a difference there. And a lot of soaps now, they say phosphate free because of the water contamination issue. But again, if it's going into your soil and you're keeping it in your soil, it's NPK is fertilizer, nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. Does that answer your question, Natalie? Thanks.
Cool.
The rebates for rainwater harvesting, I would check your area. If you're in San Diego, there's two rainwater rebates to be aware of. One is from SoCal Water Smart. I'll just put that in here. And that's actually, I think, most of Southern California. I think that's Metropolitan Water District. They do up to $350 for rainwater tanks. And then City of San Diego does another up to $400 for rainwater tanks. So you can get both if you're in the city. And I would just be cautious of like get a free barrel or whatever, because wasting $75 rebate on a 55-gallon drum that's probably not going to be very useful to you is just a waste. I would save that $75 and put it towards a bigger tank.
What was your little sticker that you used to have? Something about forget the barrels, get tanked, or what did it say?
Yeah, get tanked.
Get tanked.
I think we made a little sign. Josh and I and Bea actually on here kind of co-hosted a really cool bike tour here in San Diego a couple of years ago, where like 90 people got on bikes and we toured South Park and toured like 6 or 7 different sites where they had either different kinds of rainwater tanks or greywater systems or both, and we're growing food and natives, and we had an awesome raffle and made this cool like graphic. Get tanked.
Yeah, get tanked. That was fun. Well, we're coming close to about an hour, and I think it's a good idea to keep these discussions around an hour. And I know you've got to go somewhat soon, Brooke. So thank you so much for all of the information you just shared with us. Mm-hmm. And so we'll start to conclude and just kind of ask the questions, everybody. How do you want to engage with these questions of water in your life and your lifestyle, and just start thinking about that on the kind of the macro perspective of your watershed down to the micro of your daily actions and back to the macro and talking with your neighbors and everybody in your community. So like I said, this is the first discussion series that's part of the Ecological Lifestyle Immersion. If this type of stuff interests you, we invite you to join us in the immersion. I'll send a link here. And we'll also on the Facebook group and on the page that I send a link here, there'll be a recording to this discussion. So people who weren't able to be live tonight, they can watch it later and you can share it with your friends. Next month is going to be our food discussion. So you can tune in next month for food. And I'll put that link right now in the chat window. And this has contact information for both Brooke and I. There's a form on there where you can just type in questions right there on that page. I'll put my email as well. And there's several upcoming events that I'll let Brooke expand upon. We have one tomorrow that's part of the Ecological Lifestyle Immersion. We're going to go visit the Pure Water demonstration or Pure Water facility here in San Diego. It's a demonstration of the technology and a tour. There's only spaces for 20 people on that, and it's already full. So unfortunately, people won't be able to join us. More people won't be able to join us tomorrow. But there is another one next month, and I think they almost do them every month. So I'll send a link to that as well. There's the Green Homes Tour coming up on October 21st, which will have some great demonstrations of homes here in San Diego with innovative water systems. And then Brooke actually has 2 events coming up on the 29th and the 30th that she can share more info with you about right now.
Actually, unfortunately, the one on the 29th is full. That's at Cuyamaca Water Conservation Garden. But on the 30th, we're going to do a workshop where we install a laundry Greywater system from start to finish. It's 9 to 1. It's down in City Heights, and you can access it, the event information on my website, which I'll put up here one more time on the events page. And it'll be good fun. We'll dig some holes and plant some trees and plant the water.
Sweet.
We should have another one of those. Another one of those in October. And I think we have a rainwater harvesting workshop where we put in a 1,000-gallon tank at Bayside Community Center in November or late October. And those events will get populated. You could sign up for a newsletter if you want to get that information.
Cool. Well, so yeah, I think most of our contact info and the websites and everything over here, and when we share this on social media and stuff tomorrow, we'll make sure to include those links. So thank you again, Brooke, so much. It's been a real pleasure. Hopefully get to see you in person soon.
Tomorrow, I'll be at the tour.
Tomorrow morning, you're gonna be at the tour. Awesome. And this being our first discussion series of the series, we'd love your feedback on, we're trying to figure out the technology. This is the first time using this platform of Zoom for a meeting like this. So we'd love everybody's feedback in the chat window, or you can email us just how you thought this went, if there were technical difficulties, if you thought it was too short, too long, too much detail, too little detail, whatever your feedback is, we'd love to hear from you. So I think that's about it. Anything else you have to say, Brooke?
No, thank you guys all for taking time out of your evening to be here and spread the good word.
Come back next month for the food discussion. And we have a joke here that John, our friend who's been helping us with organizing this webinar and learning how to do this, he said, "Today, a man knocked on my door and asked for a small donation towards the local swimming pool. And I gave him a glass of water." I like that one. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining us. We'll send the links, and we really appreciate you taking the time to care about water and all of these ecological components of life. And we're all in this together on one planet, spaceship Earth, traveling through the galaxy. So it takes, we can accomplish so much more when we're working together. So it's great to share knowledge and wisdom and information in this way, and let's continue the journey. So bye.
Bye. Thanks everybody. Thanks,
Thank
Joshua.
you.